Even in this age of AI, one thing hasn't changed. The web runs on HTML and CSS. AI can write code, but if you don't understand what HTML and CSS is, you won't know if the code is even correct. Hi everyone, and welcome to the best HTML and CSS course on the internet. By the end of this course, you will be able to build clean, professional, responsive websites from scratch with real-world projects that look amazing on any device. Let me show you what we will build in this course. In this course, we are going to build two real-world websites. So the first project is going to be this Twitter clone layout. Okay, so this is a modern, fully responsive UI, adaptive layout, just like the real Twitter. Okay, so this is our own version of Twitter, and by the end of this course, you will be able to build this and even more beautiful websites on your own. And for the second project, please, if you are new to my channel, kindly press that subscribe button. Also, like and share this video. Thank you. We are going to build the Bright Future Academy website, a complete responsive school website with navigation, forms, media, responsive layout, and accessible semantic markup. So these are not boring pages at all. These are real usable UIs you can be proud to add to your portfolio and show off to a potential employer. Okay, and I am also going to provide you with the complete pages of this slide. So you are going to have a good notes on HTML and CSS. Kindly check the links below for the notes. But why learn HTML and CSS properly in this AI era? Yes, HTML is the foundation of every single web page. Yes, AI can write code, but you need to understand it. HTML remains the structure, so CSS is what makes the website beautiful. Front-end devs, designers, bloggers, and more all use HTML and CSS. HTML and CSS empowers you to be a better developer or designer. Also, I would like to walk you through the course roadmap. So in the first part of the course, we are going to cover up the foundation. So you are going to learn everything about HTML, HTML structure, tags and semantic, list, tables, forms, media, accessibility, and SEO. Basically, everything you need to know about HTML. And the second part of the course is going to be a full CSS course. So you are going to master everything you need in order to work with CSS. The third part of the course is going to be on layout. So we look at the Flexbox and the CSS grid. In the fourth part, we are going to build our first real project, which is the Twitter clone. We will build this project from ground up. And finally, we are going to build our capstone website, which is the school website, and that is going to be our final masterpiece. So if you are new to HTML, or you already know HTML, or you are even working as a front-end developer already, this course is planned for everyone. And believe me, by the end of this course, you will actually appreciate being part of the course. So I will encourage you to sit back, relax, grab your popcorn, and let's jump into this course. Welcome back. In this part, we are going to learn everything about HTML. I mean everything. Tags, structure, images, tables, forms, semantic HTML, even how to embed videos. We are not skipping anything, and we will use real examples from the Twitter UI we will build later. So you are not just learning theory, you are building something real. Let's jump in. So what is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It's not a programming language, it's a markup language. It defines the structure of a web page. HTML is the content and structure. The CSS is simply the style, okay, that beautifies the page. Think of hypertext as text that can contain links. Hypertext means you can jump from one document to another by clicking a link. Look at the very first website in the world, created by Tim Berners-Lee in 1991. This first web page was basically text and links. Okay, so you see, it's just text and links, yet it changed the world. Even modern sites like YouTube or Twitter still rely on the same fundamental HTML under the hood. Okay, so link is actually what makes the web a web. Markup is the fancy way of saying we mark up the text with instructions, telling browsers which parts are headings, which parts are paragraphs or links. So we add tags around content to tell browsers what each piece of text or media represents. So HTML tells the browser how to structure and display content. This content could be text, could be an image, a link, or table. So HTML is like the skeleton of any website. For instance, this is youtube.com. And later we are going to see that HTML is actually the content and structure of this particular website. So it's the skeleton of any website you can actually think of. HTML consists of series of elements which is used to wrap different parts of content to make it appear or act in a certain way. So imagine building a house. Each element is like a room or a specific part, a bedroom or a kitchen. They have different purposes, but they are all part of the structure that makes it a home. In order to follow up with this course, we are going to need two basic things. The first one is a code editor. So for this course, I'll be using Visual Studio Code. So simply open your web browser, type VS Code, hit enter, and just click on the very first option. Okay, and here you will see an option to download Visual Studio Code. Either you are using Windows or Mac OS, you will see an option to download Visual Studio Code that is suitable for your machine. So the second thing we are going to need is a web browser. For this course, I'll be using Google Chrome as my web browser. Feel free to use any web browser of your choice. But if you want to use Google Chrome and you don't have Google Chrome on your PC, simply type Chrome, hit enter, and open the very first option. So here you will see an option to download Google Chrome. Currently, I am on my desktop, and here on my desktop, I'm going to create a new folder. And I'm going to call this HTML CSS course. Okay, so if you're on Windows, you can right click on this folder, and here you will see an option to open with your code editor. So if you are using VS Code, you will actually see an option to open with VS Code. If you're on Mac, you can simply drag and drop this folder into your code editor. And here is our project directory. Alternatively, first you can open your code editor. Here you go to File, move down, you will see Open Folder. Go to your desktop or wherever you created that folder and select that particular folder. Here we have the same result. So there are several ways in which you can open this folder. So the first thing we are going to do here is to create a file, just like the way we create documents in Microsoft Word. So here we are going to create a document, and we are going to call this index.html. Here the extension must be .html. Just like in Microsoft Word we use .docx, in PowerPoint we have a different extension. So in HTML we use .html. You can hit enter. So now we have our HTML file. The next thing we are going to do is to actually open this particular file on a web browser. So you can go back to where you created this folder. If you open this folder, you are going to see this particular file, which is index.html. You can right click and you will see an option to open with your browser. Here I'm going to open this with my Google Chrome. Now we have opened our document in a web browser. Next, we are going to look at what we call anatomy of an HTML element. Every element typically has an opening tag, some contents, and a closing tag. So an element consists of an opening tag, contents, and a closing tag. In this case, we call this P element, and P stands for paragraph. So this here is a paragraph. So the HTML element is the opening tag plus the contents plus the closing tag. So back in our code editor, in order to create an element, we need to write an opening tag, and we write an opening tag using the less than, then the name of the tag, then you close the tag. Okay, so here we have our opening tag, our closing tag, and inside this tag we put our content. So here let's say hello world, okay, and save this file. So if you go back to the browser, we have to refresh the page. So when you refresh this page, you simply see hello world, and this here is our paragraph. Okay, let's create another paragraph. We write less than, we write P, and we need to close this tag. So you close the tag using the greater than symbol, and next we put our content. HTML is fun, and finally we need to close this tag, and let's save this file. Refresh our page. Here we see HTML is fun. Good. Next, let's actually see what happens if we actually put any text here. So let's say welcome back to the course. Okay, and let's save this. You know, for the first one, we embedded our text inside the paragraph, right? The second one, we did the same thing, and here we just added our text, you know, without using any tag. Now look at what happens here. When we save this file, let's actually refresh this page. We see welcome back to the course. Visually, there are no much difference between these three things, but let's actually examine this code, and we can do this using what we call developer tool. We are going to look at this in details later, but now I just want to show you something. Okay, just right click on this page and you will see this inspect. Just click on this inspect. Great. Now when you click on that inspect, come to this side, and here we have several tabs. Okay, so we have console, we have sources, network. These things are what we call developer tools. Now don't bother yourself about this, but now I just want to show you something. If you look at this place, we have this paragraph, right? Look at the second one, we have paragraph, just what we have in our main HTML file, right? But here, do you see what happened? For the first two, the browser actually know that, okay, these two are paragraphs, and the browser actually understands that. So for this last one, the browser is actually confused because the browser does not know if this is a paragraph or headings. So here you see the idea of that markup in the meaning of HTML. We say HTML stands for hypertext markup. So you see that markup is actually a way of telling the browser which part of our page is heading or paragraph or link. So in this case, we see that this text is neither heading, paragraph, or whatever. Okay, so here we simply see quotes. Now let's remove this, we don't need it. Next, let's look at headings in HTML. Headings are basically used to define page titles and subtitles. Each heading has to be wrapped in a heading element, and in HTML there are 6 heading elements. We have H1, H2, H3 to H6. Imagine reading a newspaper. We always have the main headline, and this main headline is just like using H1. We now have sub headlines, which here we can represent that with H2 to H6. So each each element represents a different level of content in the document. So let's see that in action. Headings in HTML, we have H1. Okay, so let's write the opening and the closing tag, and here let's say Bright Academy, and let's save this file. So if you refresh the page now, we now see Bright Academy. Note that the browser actually recognized this as a heading element and the highest level heading element, H1. So to confirm this, let's actually write another one, and let this one be our H2 tag, and here let's say I am heading 2. Let's save this file and let's refresh our page. So you see this I am heading 2, that by default this first one is actually bigger and bolder than this other one. Okay, so let's actually complete it. The next one we have H3, and here let's say I am heading 3. Now let's include our H4 and let's close these tags. So here we say I am heading 4. Let's repeat the same thing to H6. Now let's save this file and let's go to our page and refresh this page. So now you see we have our H1, H2, H3, 4, 5, and what? And 6. So we see that the H6 is the smallest level. But for best practice, okay, when you are building your own website, it's recommended to always use a single H1 per page. So every of your HTML page should have just one H1, okay, one H1, which is going to be the top level heading, and all others will sit below this in the hierarchy. Okay, so you have basically just one H1, and make sure you use the headings in the correct order. Okay, we will see this when we are building our Twitter clone or the school website. So of all these 6 heading levels, you should always aim to use no more than 3 per page, unless you feel maybe it's very necessary. Okay, so we see all this later. Why do I have to tell you this at the beginning of this course? Yes, this is important because even from your first line of code, it's very good to start learning how to write clean code. Okay, so we have to consider all these best practices as we move on with the course. Next, let's look at the paragraph element, which is actually the P element we used before. The P here, which is the short form for paragraph, defines a block just like a paragraph in a newspaper or a paragraph in a book. Okay, so most structured text consist of headings and paragraphs. Okay, so here let's actually rearrange this. So we remove this, we have our H1, and after our H1, let's actually put this and save this file. Then we have our H2. After our H2, let's add another paragraph. Let's close this, and here let's say I am learning, and let's save this. Let's refresh the page now. So we have our H1, we have the paragraphs, then we have our H2, we have another paragraph. Okay, and here let's remove this text and let's change this to our goal. Under this, let's put another paragraph. So here we can say we believe in providing world-class education tailored to every student's need. So let's save this, and now let's refresh this page. So now we have our H2, then we have our paragraph. Okay, so you see that now this page is actually beginning to have some structure. So far we've looked at headings and paragraph. Now let's look at more HTML text elements, and these are the emphasis and importance. So in normal human language, for instance in English language, we often emphasize certain words. Okay, we do this in order to alter the meaning of a sentence. So sometimes we mark some words as important or different in some ways. For instance, if you look at this right up, okay, this particular text here is actually italic, right, and the rest are not. This here has different color and the rest are not. So sometimes we use all these things to tell the reader that, hey, there is an emphasis here. Okay, so when we are reading the sentence, we actually put emphasis here. So HTML provides various semantic elements for us to actually do this. Semantic simply means something that adds meaning. We are going to see that in details later. Okay, so let's go step by step. In HTML, if we want to actually tell that a particular word is very important, we simply use the strong tag. So we simply have less than, then strong, and here let's say important. Okay, and let's save this. When you go back to the page and refresh this page, you see that this text is actually bold. Remember that this is not H1. When we use paragraph, for instance, if I put important inside the paragraph and save this text, let's refresh this page. So here you see this actually is not bold. So in HTML, we use this to actually tell that a particular text is very important. Okay, and if I want to lay emphasis on a text in HTML, we simply use EM. Okay, so here I say January 28th, and let's save this file. Let's refresh this. So here you see January 28th. Notice how January 20th appeared on the same line with this important. Okay, now see what happens if we put a paragraph here. Let's just say this is a text. Now let's refresh this page. Here you see that this particular text actually appeared on another line. Okay, so we'll see this concept later, because in this case paragraph is actually a block element. Strong and EM are actually inline elements. We'll see this later in the course, but I needed to point your attention to this because every other thing we've been seeing, they are all occupying a different line. Okay, they appear on a different line, but in this case we have this on the same line. Great. Now it is also very important to mention the I tag, and I here stands for italic. So previously this was used for styling. For instance, here if I say eat your food and save this file, when you refresh this, so here you see eat your food italic, right? Now we also have another one called the B tag, and the B here stands for bold. Okay, so here if I say thank you and we save this, let's refresh this page. So here you see the thank you and the text here is bold. Now I am bringing up these two because you might actually see this somewhere, maybe in a very old code base or even online. You might see this. Please always use strong and EM. When we use strong and emphasis, it is not just about how they look on the web page, but it's about what they mean. So these tags, the strong and EM actually add meaning to a text. Okay, so later we are going to be seeing what we call SEO, search engines optimization. These tags actually helps in search engines, and there is something we also call screen readers. Okay, for instance, if a blind person needs to read your website, the blind person cannot see what you can see. It's important to note that the strong and EM are what we call semantic elements. They are elements that add meaning to text. So not just the visual parts, not just that they are italic or bold. No, we don't use them for styling. Do not use these two elements. Why? Because these two elements has no meaning. Okay, so it has no meaning. Screen reader, please eat your food the normal way. It does not lay any emphasis. So it's very important to know about this. So here is the table telling us more details about this tag. So for the B tag, it has no meaning. Okay, so it's just for styling only. For the strong tag, it has meaning and it's an important content. For the I tag, it has no meaning, just styling only. And for the EM, it has meaning and it's used for emphasis. Okay, so do not use IMP. Instead, we use CSS to make a particular text bold or italic. So whenever we use strong and EM, we use them for the purpose of adding meaning to a particular text. Hence, always use strong and EM for meaning. Use CSS for just visual bold or italics. And welcome back. Now let's look at nesting elements. What do we mean by nesting elements? Nesting element is simply placing an element inside another. For example, we have this strong element inside a paragraph. Okay, so now we nest the strong element inside the paragraph element. It's very important to note that nesting works like stacking boxes. So you have to make sure you close the inside inside box before the outer one. Okay, so if you do something like this, here we have strong. The opening strong tag here is the first one, right? This must end with the closing strong tag. So here we opened key M, the emphasis. Okay, we have the EM tag, important, and we are closing this with the strong tag. Okay, so this here is totally wrong. Okay, so the first one we have strong, the last has to be strong. Okay, so here we have EM, this has to be closed with EM. Okay, so this is the correct way. Great. Now let's see this in action. Okay, so here let's say we have a paragraph. In here, let's say Bright Academy offers, okay, and let's save this and refresh this page, and now we have this. So we can simply wrap this word class inside the strong tag, okay, to simply make that a strong element. So let's remove this and put that here. Now let's save this file. Okay, so we can actually close this side of our code editor by simply pressing this. Okay, so we can press this, or on Mac we can use Command B, and on Windows I think that should also be Control B. So you can use Command B or Control B to toggle this particular side. Okay, so now let's refresh this page, and you see now we can read this as Bright Academy offers world-class education. So we make this test very important. Okay, so this is how we actually nest elements in HTML. So in this case now, the P element is what we call the parent element, and this one is what we call the child element. Okay, so we have the parent element and the child element. What happens if you want to lay emphasis on education? Okay, how do we do that? We simply wrap this in EM tags. Okay, so we remove this and put it here. Okay, so now let's save this and let's refresh the page. So now you see we have this education. So let's inspect this page again. All right, and now under this element, let's open all this tag. Now let's expand this paragraph. See how the browser even arranged these two elements. So we have the strong and we have the EM. So you see that this paragraph is the parent element, and the other two elements are actually inside. Okay, and they are indented. You see there is a space here pushing this one inside. So this means that these two elements are child elements to this paragraph element, and the process of having elements inside another element is what we call nesting elements in HTML. I hope this explanation is clear enough. Next, let's look at how we can actually write comments in HTML. We use comments to actually explain a particular block code. For instance, if I want to tell someone, okay, that, oh, this here is my third level heading, I can simply use comment here. Okay, so the text I'm going to put here, third comment, is going to be ignored by the computer. So we are not going to see such text on the web browser. So in HTML, to write comments, we use less than. Okay, and we use this exclamation mark, then we put dash and another dash. Okay, and immediately you see that this code here is actually commented out. So if we save this file and refresh this page, and here you see that the browser actually ignored this H3. Okay, so from H3 to the last content on this page, the browser ignored it. So this here is the opening part of the comments, just the way we have opening tag and closing tag. In order to specify the end of this comment, because here now we opened this comment and we never closed it. So if we keep writing anything here, the browser is going to ignore it, right? So we have to close our comment, and to close our comment, we simply use dash dash and we put greater than. So now I can put a text here, I am a comment, and let's save this. So let's refresh this page again. Now we see every other thing on the page, but the browser ignored I am a comment. Okay, so this is how we add comment in our HTML code. So for instance, if I want to describe a particular part of my code, I can simply use comment and say this is my third level heading. okay, and I will save this. So if you refresh this page, you see that this text here is actually not displayed on the page. Now, we also use comment for something else. For instance, if I don't want to show this part of my code, at the same time, I don't want to delete it from this file, okay? You know, now if I save this, I will no longer see that part of my code, but I still want to see this in my file. Maybe the next time I want the next person or the next developer to work on this project, I want to leave this part of the code for the person. I can simply use comment to do that. So instead of deleting this, I will simply come here and put less than, exclamation mark, dash dash, and here where I want that comment to end, I will now put dash dash and I will close it. Now let's save this file and refresh the page. You see, we still have the same result. So later we'll see more about comments in HTML, but in general, this is the basic of how we use comments in HTML. Next, we are going to see what we call void elements in HTML. So in HTML, we have what we call void elements. So I'm going to write this inside a comment, okay? Exclamation mark dash dash. And here I want to say void elements. Void elements are also called self-closing elements, okay? They are also called self-closing elements. And what exactly is a void element? In HTML, a void element is an element that has no content. Okay, it does not wrap any content. So let's see an example. We have what we call the HR. So we write less than, then HR, then we have this and we close it like this. Let's save this file. If you save this and refresh this page, you have this line here. So this HR is known as horizontal rule. It adds horizontal line to wherever we want that line to be. So if I want an horizontal line at the beginning of my page, I'll simply use less than, I'll write HR and I'll write this backslash, I'll close it and save it. Now let's refresh this page again. You see this horizontal rule. If I want to add an horizontal rule after my H1, I'll write less than HR and I'll close this. Then let's save the file and refresh this page. So now we have another horizontal rule. So in HTML, we have many void elements, but pay attention to this particular first one. Now, if you look at this first one, there is no content, right? There is no closing tag. Remember, a closing tag is like this, okay? So you have less than, you have forward slash and the element name, then you close it again. But in this case, they have no closing tag. We can't write this like this. If you save this and refresh the page, there is a problem. This is not written that way. It's written like this. So the void element do not wrap any content. So this here is a void element. Another good example of a void element is what we call a line break. So if you look at this paragraph, here we have, we believe in providing world-class education. Now, after education, I don't want to see this text here. I want to move this text to the next line. How do I do that? So HTML gives us this particular tag. So in HTML, we have the line break BR. So put this and close it. So let's save and let's refresh our page. So now you see you have after education, we added the line break and now we have tailored to every student's need. Okay, so this also is an example of a void element. Now note that the slash here is actually not important. Okay, the slash here is not important. When you remove the slash, save your file and refresh your page, you get the same result. But it's a good practice to always have this here. Okay, great. Okay, so the void elements are just like stickers, right? We stick them on the page and we move on. There is no need for any closing tag. Okay, great. And later in the course, we are going to see more of void elements. Remember, void elements are also called self-closing elements. You see, self-closing elements, they open and close themselves. Yes, before we move on, let's recap what we've just mastered. So we've seen headings for title and subtitles, paragraphs for text blocks, emphasis and importance, nesting rules, and void elements. Okay, so we are building a strong HTML foundation step by step. welcome back. All right, so far we've mastered the core HTML tags, okay, the headings, the paragraphs, emphasis, nesting, and self-closing elements. Now let's take all that knowledge and wrap it inside a real HTML document. Anatomy of an HTML document. So we are going to break down the anatomy of a proper HTML file, just like a doctor explains each part of the human body. So before we see this in action, let's look at the image we have here. So here we have this doc type. Next, we have the HTML elements. So we have the opening tag here. So look at this HTML, and here we have this closing tag, right? Now we have the head. So this HTML tag wrap every content in the page. Then after that, we have the head. Okay, so we have the head and the body, just like human body, right? We have our head, okay, then we have our body. Here also we have head and we have body. So the head and the body are the two elements that will always have inside the HTML. Okay, let's look at this one after the other. The doc type, this doc type here simply tells the browser that our document is using the new version. Okay, so we are using the latest version of HTML, which is HTML5. We will see this in details later. Okay, and the next tag here is the HTML. This is actually the root of the document, so everything goes inside this. Inside it we have the head and we have the body, so the whole thing goes inside these elements, and that is why we call it the root element. Now in the opening tag of this root element, we have this lang. This lang here stands for language, and here we are telling the browser to use EN, which is the short form for English language. Okay, so we are specifying the language in which our document is being written, right? Now the next tag here is the head tag with the content and the closing tag. So the whole thing here is called the head element. Think of the head element as the backstage of a theater, right? The backstage, it holds everything the user won't directly see. For instance, when you're watching a movie, there are a whole lot to that movie at the backstage. We don't see it, right? But they are critical, okay? They are very critical for performance and presentation of such movie, okay? So the same thing happens in our HTML document. So the head holds what we call metadata. So inside the head, we have our metadata. We're going to look at these elements in details very soon. But here we also have the title, which actually specifies the title of our HTML document. For instance, if you want to build youtube.com, the title should be YouTube. Okay, so if you are building your personal portfolio website, the title should be maybe J-GraceCoder portfolio website or Grace portfolios website. Okay, and the body, yes, the body is the main stage. Okay, so inside this body, we are going to put everything we want to see on the web page. So the body is the main stage, is everything the user sees on your web page. Okay, let's jump in now and see this in action. All right, so this is where we left our code in the last part. Now I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call this elements.html. Okay, so instead of removing this code, instead of deleting this code, I want us to copy it. So on Mac, you press Command A, or on Windows, Control A to actually select everything, then Command X or Control X to cut it, then come here in elements.html and paste this there. Okay, so I'm saving this code for your reference. Now inside our index.html, just save this file and refresh your page. So now we see nothing. Why? Because here we are running index.html. So if you go back to the folder where we created our folder at the beginning of the course, okay, so here now we have two files. So we have two HTML files, index.html and elements.html. okay, just like in Microsoft Word, you can save as many files as you want. So we can also do the same thing in HTML. So you can simply right click on this and open this with your Google. So if you open this with your Google Chrome, you have what we had before, but I simply want to open my index.html. So I will right click on this and I'm going to open with my Google Chrome. Okay, so this is my index.html. For now, I don't need this. I'm going to close it. So I'm leaving it here in this file for your reference. So in our index.html, looking at the anatomy of HTML document, the first thing we need to put here is the doc type. So we write less than exclamation mark and we type out doc type, okay? And we close this. And here we put HTML, okay? Remember, here we are telling the browser that our document uses the latest version of HTML, which is HTML5, right? And the next thing here is adding the HTML tag itself, okay? So we add the opening tag, okay? And next we add the closing tag. So just like before, when we use the paragraph tag, we have the opening part and we have the closing tag. So inside this HTML, remember we have two important elements, right? The first one is the head. So we have this head, and the second one is the body, okay? So this head is simply information that we don't want the user to see, but they are very important, okay? We don't want the user to see those information on this white space here. This is our page, right? So if we open, let's say Amazon.com, so here we see this here is the body. So the whole thing we see here is the body. We can actually right click on this. So if you right click on this and you click on inspect, go to elements. So under these elements, let's expand this. What do you see here? You see the doc type HTML. Then you see the HTML opening tag. And if you scroll down, you actually see the HTML closing tag. And inside all these things, we have two main elements, the head element and also the body element. So we have the head and the body. This is the structure of every standard HTML. And now you believe me that every website is actually made out of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So let's go back to our page. We can close this for now. Okay, now we understand the difference between this head and the body, right? So inside this head, there are many things we can add. For now, let's simply add title. Okay, so here we can specify the title of our page, and the title of our page, let's call this Twitter, and let's save this. Let's go and refresh this page. If you refresh this page, we actually do not see Twitter on this page, but see, come to this part. Do you see here we have Twitter, and that is the title of our page. Now let's inspect this again. Okay, so let's open these three dots, and here you see Twitter. Now pay attention to what happened if we change this to Facebook and hit enter. Okay, so here you see this is Facebook. Remember what I called this the other time? I called it developer 2. Now these changes I made here doesn't affect this document. So here we still have Twitter, because if you refresh this page now, we are back to Twitter. Okay, so now inside this body element, let's actually add our H1, which is going to be the main title of our web page. For now, let's just say X, and I open a bracket. Here I say Twitter, and I close my bracket. Let's save this. Okay, and now let's refresh this page. So here you see X Twitter. Okay, and here we see that this H1 is actually shown on our page, right? Why? That is because the H1 is inside the body element. So we are going to see anything we put inside this body element in this page. Okay, great. Next, we can actually add a paragraph. So let's add our P tag. And here let's say welcome to new X experience. Let's save this file, and now let's refresh our page. Okay, now we want to actually make this text here important, because that actually is the title of the application. So we want to make it important. Remember how we do that in HTML using semantic tags? We use the strong tag. Okay, so we make this a strong element. Let's cut this and put it inside here, and let's save this file. Now let's refresh our page. So here we say welcome to new X experience. Okay, so now remember what we called the art of doing this, the art of embedding building an element inside another element, we call that nesting element. Okay, so it is called nesting in HTML. Now after this, let's actually add a horizontal row. Then we have to close this. Okay, so we have this, and let's refresh our page. We have this horizontal row. Good. Now let's add another element. Later we are going to have a mini challenge to test what we've been learning. But before this mini challenge, okay, so I want you to actually mark up this test. What are you going to do? Simply add H2, okay? Inside the H2, put this navigation there, okay? So make this navigation H2 element, okay? Then make the text here a paragraph. But in this paragraph, I want the text home, okay? I want home to be an important text. And I want you to emphasize on this explore. Okay, so that is your task. Yeah, I hope you are excited about this task. So I'm going to pause here and let you do this. Okay, great. I hope you were able to do that, and if not, no problem. Relax and let's do it together. So here we are simply going to wrap this inside H2 tag. Okay, so we remove the closing tag and we put that here. And for this is going to be inside a paragraph. Close it, and let's save this and refresh this page. Okay, so now we have our navigation and we have a paragraph, but we are asked to make this home important, right? So we are going to wrap this inside the strong tag, and that makes it a strong element. We are also asked to lay emphasis on this explore, so we are going to wrap this inside EM. Okay, so we remove this and put it here. Let's save this file and refresh this page now. So now we see there is an issue, and yeah, this is the issue. Instead of strong, I wrote strong. Okay, so let's save this file and refresh the page. Exactly. So this is the solution to this little challenge, and here is our first standard HTML document. So let's look at attributes in HTML. Attributes simply give extra information to an element, and they are written inside the opening tag. Okay, so for example, remember in the previous slide, we have this HTML, then we pass lang equals to en. Lang stands for language. So this lang here is called an attribute, and in this case, this lang attribute tells the browser what language the page is written in. So here we are saying that our HTML document is written in English. Okay, so this is what attribute does. And in HTML, we have several attributes, but these here are the key attributes. So we have what we call SRC, and this SRC stands for source. Okay, so we are going to see this later. And we have what we call the auth attribute, which stands for alternative. We have what we call the title attribute. We have the href hypertext reference attribute. We have the ID attribute. We have the class attribute. We have many more attributes in HTML, but these are the key ones. Now let's actually see attribute in action. So here in our HTML element, so inside the opening tag, we add an attribute. Okay, so in this case, we want to add the lang attributes, the language attribute. And how do we write attributes? We write the attribute name, we write equal sign, then we write the quotes. Okay, and here we specify the attribute value. In this case, it is en. Remember, it could be English, Italian, IT, and many more. Okay, this here is what we call an attribute. Okay, now let's actually look at another example. For instance, this paragraph here. Now let's use the title attribute, and here let's simply write title. Okay, so title, you write equal sign, and inside that quote, let's say this is a paragraph tooltip. Okay, now let's save this. If you save this and let's refresh our page, we do not see that title here, but watch what happens when we hover on this welcome. Okay, so when we hover on this welcome, bottom, you see this is a paragraph tooltip, and that is coming from the attributes. Okay, great. So you are beginning to see the beauty of these attributes step by step, and we will see attributes in details very soon. Okay, because some HTML elements actually requires these attributes to work properly. Okay. What is a web page without visuals? Images bring your page to life, from profile pictures to banners. The image tag is how we add visuals to HTML. So in HTML, the img stands for image. Okay, the image is a void element, and the image needs some attributes in order to work properly. So for this image to work properly, this src tag is very important. And what actually is src? Src stands for source. So this actually tells the source, that is the location of this particular image. And next we have the alt, which we call the alt, and the alt stands for alternative. Okay, so if anything is wrong with this source, we actually see this particular text on the browser, and this alt is actually very important, and we will see this very soon. So next, let's look at some important image attributes. Okay, so first we have this source, which actually is a very important attribute for the image to work, okay, because it specifies the path to the image file. Then we have the alternative. So this is the text shown if anything is wrong with the image. The image tag can also accept the width and the height. Okay, so we can also specify width, we can specify height, and we can also specify title. Without wasting more time here, let's actually see this in action. So to add an image in our page, we need to use the img. Okay, let's close this. Remember, an image is a void element, and from the session where we treated void elements, we said that putting this slash here is actually recommended. Even if it works without the slash, having this here is like a good practice. Okay, so if you just write this and save this file, let's actually refresh the page, and now you see we see nothing even when we saved the file. Okay, so if you refresh the page, nothing happens. This is because this image needs an important attribute, the src attribute. This here is very important, because with this now we can specify the path of that image. So for instance, here if we say logo.png, and let's save this. Now if you save this and refresh the page again, now you see this here. Okay, remember when we removed this, let's divide this into two, okay, so that we can see what we are doing clearly. And let me actually increase this. Great. If we remove this and save this file, let's refresh this page. You see, we see nothing, and that means that the src attribute is actually required. Okay, so now when we save it again and refresh this page, we see this icon here. And why are we seeing an empty image? This is because here we specified logo.png, and if you open our directory, okay, here there is no any file. Remember that an image is a file on its own. So just the way we have .html file, for an HTML file, we have .doc, a Microsoft Word file. We have .pdf for PDF file. That is also the same way we have an extension for an image file, and in this case we are using .png. So an image on its own is a file. So here we are linking this image file, okay, but here we don't have any file called logo.png. So in order for this to work, we actually need to add the logo inside our folder. Okay, so one way we can do that is actually, let's go to uifaces.com, open this first option, right click on this and follow this save image as, and now we can actually search for our file. We called this HTML CSS. So here, let's save this as logo.png, okay, and click on save, use PNG. Great. Now let's go back here, and immediately you see this logo.png. Now what did we do? We actually downloaded this image from the website. We saved it into our own folder, right? We saved it into our own folder. Now we have this image seated in our local machine. Okay, so if we go back here and save this file, okay, so now let's go back to the page and refresh this page. Okay, so now you see we have this image in our page, and congratulations, you are actually doing something great. Now let's actually see the next attribute. Okay, so we see that this SRC is required, right? Let's see the second very important attribute, and this is called AUT, which is the short form for alternative. So here we need to add a description. So here let's say David logo. Okay, and let's save this file. We can close this side now. Just click on this, or you use Command B or Mac, Control B on Windows. Okay, let's save this file and refresh this page. When you scroll down, you see there is no change. We can't see this text here on the page. Now the question is, if we cannot see this David logo, why do we need the AUT? In fact, even the image displayed without the AUT attribute. So why do we need the AUT attribute? Let me tell you why we need this, and also why it is very, very important. Now, let's say that there is something wrong. Maybe the spelling of the path to the image is wrong. If you refresh this page, and now you see we don't have that image again on the page, but here we simply see David logo. So if anything is wrong with your image, the AUT attribute still tells the user that, oh, here we are meant to have a logo, and it is David's logo. That is one important of this attribute. But the most important thing this AUT attribute does is that it helps screen readers. For example, if a blind person visits your website, the truth is the blind person can actually not see this image, okay, because the person is blind. But the screen reader actually reads out this particular text, okay? So the screen reader is going to read that here we have David logo, okay? So it's going to read an image, David logo, and the blind person will actually know that, oh, there is an image on this part of the website, and the image is actually David logo. So that is the second reason why this attribute here is very important. We will talk more on this when we get to optimization. Okay, great. Now the next attribute this image can also take is the width. So we can specify the width of the image. Here let's say 400, and now let's refresh the page. So here you see we actually changed the width of the image. We can also set the height of this image. So here we can say let the height be 200, and let's save this. Okay, so now we see that the height is 200 and the width is 400. But see how the image is. Okay, so now our image is stretched, right? And this is because the value of the height, okay, the height is quite different from the width. But if you change this to 400 and save this, let's refresh this again. You see, this actually looks better. So for now, I'm going to remove the height and leave the width, okay? Because if you refresh it, we still have the same thing. And I will tell you why this is so, okay? We see this later in the course. So it is better to take this one step at a time, okay? Now, this here is the basic of how we use image in HTML. Now, let me ask a question. What happens if we want to actually add an image that we don't have in our own folder? Okay, so we want to link an image from a particular website. Okay, so we want to add an image from the internet. Most often we use free images, especially when you are building maybe a personal website. So we use free images, and one of those websites where we get free images is what we call Unsplash. Okay, just go to unsplash.com. I'm going to look for some free images here, okay, so I can simply use this. If I don't want to download this image, I will just right click on this image and I will copy image address. So copy that image address. Here, let's add another image, okay? So img, and let's close this. So let's add our src, and now you paste that link here. So let's paste that link, and let's add an auth. And remember, this auth actually should be a good description of what we have in the image. So here we say we have, let's say, a man in a green field, okay? You can actually come up with a better description, okay? So you add something that is descriptive enough. And now let's save this file and go back to our page. Let's refresh this. So you see here now we have this image. Okay, now let's also add the width. Okay, so here let's say 600, and now let's refresh this. Okay, so we have a bit smaller image. So this is how we can actually add an image to our web page. So here we added a local image, and here we added an image from the internet. Okay, another thing to bear in mind in this tool is that, for instance, if anything is wrong with your internet connection, this second image might actually not display. Okay, but this will always work, either connected to the internet or not. And we will actually see which is the best. Should we always use an image from the internet, or we should simply use a local image? We will see which is the best when we are building the main project. Okay, so congratulations, you've learned how to use image in HTML. Now let's look at some common mistakes. So in general, most times you see people forgetting to add these auth attributes. It's very important to always add the auth attributes, okay? And sometimes we might actually make mistake with our file paths. In case you see that your image is actually not displaying, just pause and check your folder structure. Okay, sometimes the image appears too huge. Okay, this might be the fact that we actually did not add the width attribute. Okay, so these are common mistakes. Welcome back, and in this session we're actually going to look at some very important extensions. Okay, so in the beginning we actually downloaded and installed Visual Studio Code. So let's look at some very good extensions we need to use or know at this stage of the course. Now, if you notice, sometimes when I save my file, you actually see that somehow the file looks organized. Okay, so this is because of something. Now just simply click on this particular icon. It is called extensions icon. Here search for Prettier, okay, spelled this way, and just choose the first option. Here you will see install. I already have Prettier installed, so just click on install. Okay, that is the first thing you need to do. Once you install Prettier, come to settings. Okay, so this particular icon, click on this icon, and here you click on settings. So here just search for format on save, and you are going to see this option. Simply click on this. So next here, type default formatter. Okay, and now you will see this option, default formatter. Click on this icon and search for Prettier. Okay, so I already selected mine as Prettier by default. So here you have to search for Prettier. Okay, and once you see Prettier, simply select Prettier, and this makes Prettier your default formatter. Okay, and let me show you what this does. Okay, so for now, let's close this. Let's close that part. Now, if you look at my image, the last image, do you see how long it is? Okay, and we've saved this file, right? Now save this file again. You actually you begin to see the work of Prettier. Okay, so you see it's actually formatted and arranged everything properly. So instead of having to scroll, you see it's arranged everything properly. Now see another thing here. Let's say we add a paragraph. So close this. Let's say hello. Let's add another paragraph, and now I'm going to add that paragraph here. So here let's say it. Now see the space. Okay, so this is not well arranged. Now just save this file, and you see automatically it is shifted to the right position. So when you look at your file now, you see it is very clean. So this is the usefulness of repeat here actually. Great. The next extension, okay, so go back to the extension icon and here search for Live Server. Okay, so click on the first one. So just install this Live Server. Okay, so I already installed it. Here you will see install instead of uninstall. Install it and close this. So immediately you install that, just come back, look at your code editor, move to the down part, okay, where you have all these icons, down part of your code editor. You will see an icon and there is a text there. Here you see go live. Okay, just click on the go live and immediately you see this actually loads our website. This actually loads our website in this particular host. Okay, so now we are going to be using this, and the question is, why do we actually need to use Live Server? Why are we not working the way we've been doing? Let me show you the beauty. So after this image, in fact, let's even remove this image and let's save this file. You see immediately you see the changes on this page. So before this image, if I add, let's say H3, okay, and here I say contacts, and let's save this. So you see your H3 immediately. We don't have to click on this icon. The Live Server handles that part for us under the hood. Okay, so from now on, we are going to be working this way. Anytime we want to open this document on the web page, we simply click on Go Live. Okay, great. At this point of the course, it's the right time to look at a very important topic, and this is file path. Okay, what exactly is file path? A file path is like a map or address that tells your browser or code where to find a particular file. Okay, this file can be an image file, just as we saw in the previous session. It can be a PDF file or any file. File path is just like a map that tells your browser or your code where to find that file, okay, the location of that file on your computer or on the web. Remember the image session. In the image session, we added an image from our local PC, okay? We downloaded an image and we saved it in our local machine. So that image is sitting in our local machine. We used that image. We also used an image from the internet, okay? So the file path is just that address. Remember that SRC in your image? We had this SRC and we said SRC is equal to, we wrote something. That is actually a file path. Just imagine that your computer is a city and the folders in your computer are streets, okay? Inside this city, inside your computer, you have several streets, okay, and the files, okay, the files are the houses in the streets. Okay, so a file path is the exact route you take to reach a specific house. That route in which you are going to pass in order to enter this particular house is the file path. Okay, great. So let's look at the types of file path. So in general, we have two types of file path. We have what we call the absolute path, and the absolute path actually gives the entire route from the beginning. Okay, so either from your local machine, from your system root, or the website root. Okay, so this is an example of absolute path. So here it actually gives the full location of a file starting from the root of the website. Remember, when you visit a website, the root of that website is this HTTPS, right? You have HTTPS, then the base URL, okay, now the images and the name of the image. Okay, so this here is like a folder, images folder, and this is the name of the image. So remember, in the image session where we used an image from Unsplash, that actually is an example of absolute path. So here is a path to this particular image. Great. So what does this actually do? This simply loads an image on the web, and this starts from the domain. So this is a good example of an absolute path in your local machine. And in development, we actually rarely use this. Okay, this is not actually common. The second one is what we call relative path. So a relative path actually points to a file relative to the location of the current file. The difference between absolute and relative is the fact that for relative path, we don't have to show the full path we don't have to show the full path to that file, okay? So we only show a particular path that is relative to the main location. So assuming this is our project folder, so inside this project folder, we create another folder and we call this images, okay? Inside this particular folder, we have logo.png. Then we have another folder. So you see these images and these pages, they are on the same level, right? So inside this folder, we now create a file which is called about.html, okay? And here we have the base file. We have our index.html, which is directly inside this particular folder. We will see this in action very soon. But in order to use a relative path, for instance, if I am inside about.html and I want to make a reference to this image, I need to move. You see, I have to move out of this folder, and that is why we use ... So this becomes ... / images. So this images is this particular folder, then slash the file, which is logo.png. So this here is an example of a relative path. This ... simply says move a step above, okay? Move a step out of this folder. Remember, the about is inside pages and this image is inside another folder. So we have to move out of this particular folder before we can access this folder. That is what this ... does. Now, imagine we are inside index.html. This index.html is on the same level with images and with pages. So here I don't need ... because I am not inside any folder, right? I am directly inside the same folder, hosting both images and pages. So here I can simply use images / logo.png. So this here is an example of relative path. Okay, so we see that when we use dot means current folder, okay? Dot means one folder up, and / always specify the root folder. Let's see this in action in order to understand what we are saying. All right, so we said we have two types of path. We have absolute. So this here is actually a good example of an absolute path. These include the full URL, okay? And here we have a good example of relative path. Now, let's say we don't want to use relative path. We want to make use of this logo, but we want this to be an absolute path. How do we actually go about that? Now, go to where you created the folder, okay? So I created my folder in the desktop. This is the logo. This is this image file. If you're on Windows, simply hold on Shift, okay? So hold the Shift key and right click on this folder. Once you do that, you are going to see an option to copy as path. Okay, simply copy that and now you paste that here. Okay, if you're on Mac, right click on the file, press the option key. First, you have to right click on the file. Second, press the option key. Okay, so immediately you right click on that file, you can toggle the option key. Once you press that option key, you are going to see this option, copy logo.png as path name. Simply click on that and remove this and paste that here. Okay, and this here is an example of absolute path. Why? Because an absolute path always starts from the root directory. Okay, so remember, this / is the root. Okay, the users here is the folder, so is a folder inside the roots, a folder inside the roots, and this here, okay, is the user's home directory. Okay, that is my home directory. Then here we have this desktop. This desktop is a folder. Remember the other time we said we created this on our desktop. So the desktop is actually a folder, and this is the folder we created when we started this course, and this is our image. Okay, so this is an example of an absolute path, and in general in development we actually use the relative path. So this is an example of relative path. Now, what happens if I actually come here? Okay, so with this icon, I can create a file. With this particular icon, I can actually create a folder. And let me call this folder images. Now, imagine what happens if I now move this image. Okay, I'm moving this logo image inside this folder, and I will click on move. Okay, so if you go back to the page, now you can no longer see David logo. Here we are only seeing the alt text. Why? Because the David logo is no longer in logo.png. David logo is now inside another folder. and it is inside slash. Okay, the slash here is the root here, the root, this path. Okay, it is inside slash images, then slash logo.png, and if you save this, you now have the image. Okay, so this here is an example of relative path. Okay, so in relative path, we don't use the full address, we don't use the complete path, we use a path that is relative to that particular main path. But for the absolute path, we have to show everything. Okay, so I hope this is clear enough. We'll be making reference to these terms as we move on with the course. Links, the arts of the web. Welcome back. In this session, we are going to see how we can create hyperlinks in HTML. In HTML, we create hyperlinks using the anchor. So the tag A stands for anchor, and it creates hyperlinks which allow users to navigate to other pages. So hyperlinks actually allows you to navigate to another page. Okay, so moving from one page or one site or one session or one file to another, this is achieved using hyperlink. Okay, so this here is how we add hyperlink to our website. Okay, so we simply use this anchor tag. Let's look at some important attributes of the anchor tag. So the first one is the href, and this is the most important attribute. Why? Because that tells the browser where to go whenever we click the link. Okay, so let's actually look at this one after the other. So after this image, let's actually add a comment. Okay, and here let's say hyperlinks. And to add the link in our page, we simply use what we call the anchor tag. Okay, so this here means anchor. It stands for anchor. Okay, so the anchor tag expects a very important attribute, because when we save this now and let's go to our page, you see, remember we are using live server. So when we go to the page, we see nothing. So here, let's simply say visit Twitter, and let's save this file. So here you see this text, visit Twitter, and here this does not look like a link at all because we can't even click this. So the href attribute is actually required, is important. Okay, so here now we can specify the location where we want this to go. So let's say we want to go to https:// remember here now I am using what type of path? I can hear you say absolute path. So here let's say www.twitter.com, and let's save this. Now immediately you go back to that page, the color should actually change. Okay, so now the color should change from black to blue. So here you see we have blue. Let me expand this more, and here you see this blue. When you click on this, see what happens. Okay, you see this actually takes you to twitter.com, and it takes you to twitter.com on our the same. Remember, this is our page. So if I close this now, I already closed our web page because it is opened on the same tab we have our own web page. So let's move back, and this takes us back to our page. Okay, so if you click on this link, it opens Twitter on this same tab, right? So click on this again, you see it loads Twitter on the same tab. The href is an important attribute. The second attribute we are going to be looking at is what we call targets. You have this in the slides. So I explained each of these attributes very well on the slides. So you can actually download the slide and enjoy. Okay, so here we have targets, and here we have several options, but I'm going to select this underscore blank for now. That is cool. And let me tell you what this underscore blank is going to do. This attribute, with this, it is going to open the same twitter.com, but now on a different tab. Okay, so it's going to open that website on a different tab. So if you click on this now, you see what happens. Now we have twitter.com on a different tab. Great. So the third attribute we are going to look at is what we call the title attribute. Now if you go back here, move on this, you see nothing, right? Now let's see what happens when we add the title here. So let's add the title, and let's say, hey, you are going to Twitter. Let's save this file. For now, let's actually comment out this code. Remember how to add comments in HTML: less than, okay, the exclamation mark, dash dash. good. So let's remove the closing path and let's paste that here. And I also want to comment out the first image. So you can put that here. Let's save this. Okay, now we don't have an image on this page. Okay, so now let's see what this title actually does. So just try moving on this. Here you see, hey, you are going to Twitter. You see the brownish background, okay? And you see the text, hey, it's a tooltip text, okay? So hovering on this text shows the title as a tooltip. Okay, the next attribute we are going to look at is what we call the rel attribute. The rel, R-E-L attribute. And this attribute, rel, stands for relationship. Okay, we use this actually whenever we use the target blank. Okay, and in here we need to pass no opener, and also we need to pass no referrer. Okay, no opener, no referrer. And why do we need this rel? We actually need this rel whenever we use this target underscore blank. This is very important. One, because it prevents the new page. Remember, when you use target underscore blank, it opens a new page. It prevents the new page from accessing our original page using JavaScript. Okay, so we are going to look into this later. But another thing this does is the fact that it improves security and performance when opening links in another tab. Okay, so the next attribute we are going to look at is what we call the download attribute. Here now, let's add another anchor tag. And for this, remember, the href is a must. Href is a must. Okay, but now we want to specify a path here. Now let me show you something. See, here we have an image, right? So here I'm going to specify the path to this image. Okay, so let's say we want to go to /images/logo.png. okay, remember, this is not an image tag. Okay, so this is not going to display an image on our page, but now we want to see another attribute of this anchor tag, and that is what we call the download. So here I'm going to write just like this, download, and here I'm going to say download David logo. Okay, and let's save this. So now we can close this. Let's save this and go to the page. So here we have this download David logo. Let's click on it. If you click on it, do you see what happens? It triggers download. You see, it triggers download directly. So if you click on save, now we have this logo.png, and it is David logo. Wow, this is nice. Now let me show you another thing you can do. Here you can actually specify a name. Now before we do this, let's go back to the page. Click on this download again. Do you see the default name here? This name here is coming from the name of this file. If I want to name this something else, by default I want user to see David logo. Okay, and I save this. Now let's cancel this and click on this again. Now here you see David logo, and when I save this, I now have David logo. Do you see that? So you see how you can actually use this, and you see how important this can be, especially when you are building your own portfolio website. That website you are going to use to get a job, your portfolio website. Here you are going to put your CV. Okay, you are going to put a CV here. So instead of having logo.png, you can create another file here. You create a folder. For instance, you call it files. Okay, so inside this file you can now put your CV, and this can be in PDF. Okay, and now when you are building your file, instead of logo.png, you simply go to / here you have files, and you go to CV.png. Now let's close this, and if you now click on, instead of David logo, you simply change this to David CV, and here you say download. In fact, you can simply say my CV and save this. Okay, so when I click on my CV, here you see David CV, and you can download this file, and you see we are able to download the PDF because there is no content in the PDF. You know, it's an empty file. Okay, so this actually is a good attribute to know. So another thing we want to look at is actually an email link. Okay, so an email link, here we use anchor tag also. Now our href, instead of making reference to a particular file, here we are going to say mail to. Okay, this term here is very important, mail to, and after mail to you put colon. Okay, it's very important. That is all we need. And next, I'm going to specify my email. So maybe I say info.edu, okay? And here I say visit email us and save this file. When you click on email us, it will actually trigger your default email. Okay, do you see what happened? Do you see what happened? So when you click on this, it is going to trigger the default email. If the default email in your browser is Gmail, this is going to trigger Gmail, enabling you to send an email to this particular address. Okay, so clicking this email us will open the user's default email app to send an email. The next thing we are going to look at is the telephone link. Okay, you know, sometimes when you visit some websites, you actually see a telephone icon. Okay, when you click on that icon, you are actually able to call such number. So let's see how we do that in HTML. We simply use the anchor tag, and in our href, you see the href is always required. Here we put tel:, for email we put mail to : so now we can specify our phone number. So let's say +39, okay, 2231, okay. Let's say call help desk, okay, and save this file. Now, if you click on this call help desk, you see what happens. Open FaceTime. This because I'm working on a MacBook, so you might actually see something different. So the truth is, it's going to show you a way of calling that number. Look at this part. Do you see this click to call? Do you see the call icon? And you see the number we actually added from our HTML file, okay? Look at this very well. Look at this very well. So the number here is actually the number we added here, +3950. That is exactly what we have here. So you can actually call this number, okay? And now I believe you are beginning to see the beauty of hyperlinks. They are very important. In fact, it's the art of the web. Congratulations. And this is how we create links in HTML. Please, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay, all right. Okay, so in the last session we looked at hyperlink in HTML, and we looked at some important attributes like href, like targets. We looked at rel. We looked at the rel, which is the relationship attribute. We saw how we can allow users of our websites to download a particular file. We saw the mail to, okay, how we can actually send mail, and also how we can enable calling in our web page. So it's time for challenge. And what actually is our mini challenge? The task is you have to create a link, okay, a link to YouTube that opens in a new tab. That's the first thing. The second thing is add a download button for a dummy PDF. Okay, and third, you need to send a mail. Okay, so add a link to actually send you a mail. Then fake a phone number. Okay, so you can just fake a phone number and add the telephone link. Next, add a link that has a title. And finally, I want you, yes, you, to add an image either from your computer or from a splash. And please, and yeah, do this and drop your solution in the comment section. I really want to see your mini website. Yeah, so I'm going to pause here and let you do this. Welcome back, and I hope you were able to complete the mini challenge. Please don't forget to drop your solution in the comment section. And if you actually have any problem with any parts, feel free to ask me in the comment section, or simply check the slides and you will see the solution to what you are looking for. Great. Now we are going to see how we can actually structure our HTML documents the right way. Okay, and why is this lesson very important? Learning how to structure your HTML documents the right way with semantic tags is very important. Most beginners actually build websites just like this using div. In this course, I have not shown you this div, okay? And that is because we've not treated what we call semantic elements. And in HTML, semantic elements are simply elements that clearly describe their meaning, okay? For instance, here we have this div, the opening tag div and the closing tag div. This div is an element, okay? But it is a non-semantic element. A non-semantic element is the element that adds no meaning, okay? these particular tags add no meaning to this content here, okay? But when we use the semantic element add meaning to the content they are holding. So in HTML, we have many semantic tags. For examples of semantic tags are header, okay? So when you use a tag like header, any content you put inside that tag is going to be seen as the header part of your website. So we have nav for navigation, we have main for the main content of the web page, we have section for grouping related content, we have article for standalone content, okay? And we have aside for some side information, and we have footer for the footer part of our web page. Okay, so here we have a basic structure of any web page. Anatomy of the HTML document. We said every HTML document must have head and body. Okay, now we are considering this body. Any web page you visit must have header, okay, the header part of the web page, the main part of the web page, and the footer. So we have three core things, just like human body. We have our head, okay, we have our body, and then we have the legs, right? So you have the header, you have the main, and you have the footer. Okay, so let's actually see this in action and see how we can structure our page like a pro developer. Now let's see how we can actually structure this page bearing semantic elements in mind. Okay, so remember we said inside the body element, okay, there are three core tags. The first one is called the header tag. Okay, this is the opening and this is the closing tag. So inside the header tag, we are going to have things like the site logo and navigation. So first, inside this header, for now, let's copy this and put this here. Okay, also let's copy all this navigation and put it here for now. Okay, so now inside the header we have our site logo, right? We have the logo and we have some navigations. Now because this is a navigation, we are going to wrap it inside the nav tag. Okay, and nav here stands for navigation. So for every standard HTML page you visit, we have the header, okay, and next we have what we call the main tag. Okay, and this main tag is going to wrap every other thing excluding the footer. Okay, so we're going to remove everything we have here. Let's copy everything here. Let's copy everything. So we cut everything and we paste that inside the main tag. Okay, so now we have the header, we have the main, and finally we are going to add the footer. Okay, so inside this footer, let's simply add a paragraph, and in this paragraph, let's say for now, let's simply say my Twitter clone. Okay, so now we have those three things. The first one is the header, the second one is the main, and finally we have the footer. Now let's open back this main. Inside this main, let's open back this main. Remember that this main contains the main parts of our web page. Okay, remember this part is called the header section. Okay, this whole part is the header section. For most websites, you will always see the logo here, and then you see some navigations. So here you have home, about, etc. Okay, so in general you see things like that. This particular part is what we call the header. Okay, so that is the header part of that web page. So here we are now saying that every other thing on that page is going to be the main part. Okay, so every other thing on that page is going to be the main part of that page. Okay, and this main part will now contain several parts. So the main part is like a parent component, and when we say parent component, it means there are other smaller components. Okay, so here we are going to have several parts, and finally we have the footer. Okay, so the major three parts is the header, the main, and the footer. Now let's visit a real website. Okay, so this is upwork.com. This particular path that you see here is called the header part of this website. Okay, so every other thing from this path, and we move down, okay, you scroll down to this path, is what we call the main section. So this here is the main part of this document. Okay, so to this very part, and the last thing on the page is the footer of this web page. Okay, so you see there are three main things: the header parts, the main, and finally we have the footer. So this is how we actually structure our HTML document. So now inside this main, we can now add several parts, and we wrap these parts with, for instance, we have what we call section. Okay, so we have what we call section tags. So let's copy all these parts. So let's say all these ones to this paragraph, they are inside this particular section. Okay, so we can add another section. So we can add another one here, and let's also copy this and let's put this here. And also inside this main, we can also add our aside. Okay, so remember the aside tags, and let's put this here. Okay, so now see the structure of this page. We have the main, and inside the main we have the first section. This could be the hero section of our web page. We have another section, we have the aside. Okay, and now you see how this structure makes this document more organized, neat, and even very easy to read. Okay, so any developer can easily visit your code and simply understand everything without any stress. Okay, the person can easily know that, oh, this is the header part of this web page, and this is the main section, and of course here is the footer. Okay, so this is the foundation of how you can actually organize your web page, and this makes you a very good front-end developer. Okay, because the quality of your code is very important. Now pay attention to this. Visually, there are no any change on this web page, right? But if you actually inspect this page, let's inspect this page. Remember, on Mac you can use Option Command J or Option Command I to actually toggle that side. When you use Option Command I, it's going to open this element directly, and when you use Option Command J, it's going to open the console directly. Okay, so let's go back to this element, and now let's actually expand this. Okay, so let's see the beauty of what we've just did. Now inside this body, okay, let me actually expand this. Okay, I hope you can see this very well. Okay, so inside this body, we now have our header, we have our main, and we have our footer. These are the three main elements you should actually have inside your body when you are building any web page. Okay, this is very important because HTML isn't just about displaying content, it's about organizing it. Semantic tags give structure to your page, it helps search engines understand your content, and it makes your HTML look like it was written by a pro. And remember, when a screen reader visits your website, the person will easily understand that this is the header of your web page and that this contains the main content of that web page, and here we have the footer. Okay, so the blind person will understand everything you have on your web page easily without any stress. I hope this makes sense to you, and you are going to see the beauty of this when we start building the real projects. All right, welcome back. I hope you are enjoying this course. You've learned how to structure content. Now, let's add some power tools to your tests. The kind of tags developers, scientists, and even writers use daily. These are simple to write, but it makes your content way more meaningful. Okay, so let's look at some other tags that are very important in HTML. Examples of these tags are what we call soup, sub, and these two are mostly used for math and chemical notation. We have what we call ABBR for abbreviations. Okay, we have code, we have KBD, we have pre. These three are majorly for code snippets. So HTML also provides us ways in which we can easily write code snippets. We also have what we call mark okay, to highlight text, and we have what we call address. This address tag is mostly used for contact details. Okay, so let's see this in action. Okay, so this is where we left our code in the last session, and remember, this header session contains just the logo and our site navigations for now. So I'm going to be working inside the main session. Okay, so let's actually add another session here, so we can use the session tag. Okay, and inside this session, let's add a paragraph. And inside this paragraph, let's say water. Now, okay, just imagine we want to represent water in the chemical form. Okay, we want to use the chemical formula. Remember, the formula for water is H. Yeah, I can hear you say H2O. Okay, so let's actually see how we can write this. So here we say H2O. Okay, and let's save this. Now, when we save this here in our page, we have this water H2O. Okay, let's actually save this. And for now, I'm going to comment out this particular aside. Okay, so let's comment out this. Remember how we add comments? We use less than. Okay, so we use the exclamation mark dash dash, then we have to close it. Okay, so let's expand this and close that after the aside. So dash dash and greater than. Okay, so for now we commented out our aside. Now, if you look at the web page, okay, so here we have this water. Let's actually add space here and save this file. Here we have water and you can see H2O. But the truth is, this is not how we normally write this, right? So we want this to look exactly like the chemical formula. What do? We actually use another tag. Okay, so after H, let's use what we call sub, S-U-B, and let's close this. So we now put our 2 inside this sub. Let's save this now. And you see, now we have this H2O. Okay, and you see, now we have this H2O. I hope this makes sense to you. Okay, next, let's add another paragraph. And now we want to write the area of a square. So the area of a square is L square, right? And when we save this, we have area of a square is L2, not L square. So we have to wrap these two inside the soup. So we use the soup for raised to power. Okay, so now we remove these two here and put it inside the soup. So now you see we have L square. Okay, so with sub we can easily write things like this, and with soup we can actually raise to power. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Next, let's see how we can actually use abbreviations. Okay, so for instance, let's add another paragraph here, and in this paragraph, let's say that we want to write the full meaning of the word WHO. Okay, WHO, which is actually World Health Organization. But we don't want to write the full text here. We simply want to use WHO. But we can't just write it like this, because writing it like this does not make much sense. Okay, so we simply want to use the right tag. Okay, so for this, we need to wrap this text here inside the ABBR tag, and we simply use ABBR. Okay, and let's close this. So instead of just writing WHO, we have to write that inside the tag. And this abbreviation tag takes an attribute, and that is what we call the title attribute. And inside this title attribute, we now have to write the meaning of that abbreviation. So here we say World Health Organization. So immediately you do this, you actually see what happens. Okay, so you actually see that this here is an abbreviation, and that the meaning of that word is World Health Organization. Great. So now we can actually make this a sentence, and we say the World Health Organization. After the abbreviation, we can now say released a new report. Okay, so now you see that this now is an abbreviation. Now look what happens when we actually remove this attribute and save this file. You see, it looks like the normal text. So when you use this abbreviation, it is very important to pass this title attribute, and the attribute value must be the full meaning of that abbreviation. I hope you see how this works. Okay, so abbreviations become powerful when you give them meaning. Okay, and remember, screen readers will also understand the meaning of that abbreviation. The next tag we are going to look at is the code tag. Okay, let's add a paragraph here, and here let's say to print in JavaScript, use in general. To print in JavaScript, we use console.log. okay, we use stuff like this. Now when you save this file, you see, look at how it looks on our page. Okay, this does not make sense actually, because console.log here is actually a code. So HTML gives us this code tag. Let's remove this console.log and put it inside the code tags to make it a code element. Okay, so when you save this, see what happens. There is a change here. Okay, this console.log is formatted already. Now it looks like a code. The next tag we are going to look at is the KBD tag, and KBD is simply keyboard input. Okay, so this tag is used for keyboard input. So let's add a paragraph, and inside this paragraph, let's say press Ctrl C, and remember Ctrl is a keyboard input. So instead of writing Ctrl like this, press Ctrl C. We want to wrap this inside the KBD tag, and let's save this. So look at the text. Let's also wrap this C inside KBD tag, and let's put our C here. So now you see, press Ctrl C. Great. Next, let's look at the pre tag, and this pre tag is mostly used for pre-formatted blocks. For instance, let's say we want to add a code here. Let's say a function that actually greets anyone that visits our page. Okay, and here let's say console.log, welcome to our page, and let's save this. So when you scroll down, you see this is actually a pre-formatted block. Okay, so imagine if we change this to a paragraph. You see, look at what we have when we changed that to a paragraph. It looks so ugly, okay, and so difficult to understand. So you see how important these tags are. It's very important to understand what each tag actually represents. Okay, so this is very, very good. Let's change this part to what we add. Okay, so what this tag does is that it preserves our spacing, our line breaks, and our indentation. So it presents everything we have here the way it is written. If you change this to H1 and save this file, you see it's reformatted everything. It doesn't preserve it. And see what we have on the page. So this pre-tag is very important. With the pre-tag, when you save this file, the text remains just the way you arranged it. So if I add another line here, it's going to preserve that line. Look at it. You can't do this with any other tag. Okay, this is the tag that actually does this magic. You see why it is important for you to understand all these tags. It's very important. Okay, it's going to save you a whole lot of stress when you become a developer, or if you're already working as a developer. This is going to save you some stress. And finally, let's look at the address tag. Remember I said the address tag is mostly used for writing contact details. So let's use the address tag, and here let's say Bright Future Academy. Okay, and after this, let's add the line break. Okay, remember what the BR tag does? It will automatically push the next text. For instance, if I write this here and save this, it's going to push that to the next line. Okay, so let's remove this, and after this I want to say 123 Future Avenue, and let's add another line break, and here let's say Turin, Italy, and also let's add a line break. Okay, and finally let's add hyperlink. Okay, and for the hyperlink we want to add an email. Okay, so we say mail to, we want them to be able to send us an email, so we use the mail to info@futurebright.edu. So here let's simply copy this, info@futurebright.edu, and let's save this. So now you see how this is formatted. It looks exactly like the way we write an address, either in our letter writing or even in a newspaper. Okay, so you see that this is actually very good. It add semantic meaning to our contact section. Okay, when screen readers visit this website, they will simply understand that this here is an address. Okay, and they will automatically treat it as contact information. There are a whole lot of tags in HTML. These very few ones are very important. Okay, and it is time for another mini practice challenge. And what are you going to do? So you're going to add the following to your project. First, add a paragraph that uses sub and sub. Okay, just any paragraph at all. Make it very fun. Then add an abbreviation like ABBR. Okay, then let the title be hypertext markup language, and you do that for HTML. Add a line with code for any HTML tag. Okay, so you can use any HTML tag and wrap that inside code. Write a short command using KBD. Okay, the keyboard input. Then highlight some important text. Okay, remember I skipped this mark, but I already explained it in the previous slide. This is a special simple challenge. You can go to MDN, just type MDN HTML mark tag and see how you can actually use this. So I want you to highlight something important with mark. Finally, I want you to add your contact info using address. Okay, please do this, and I want to see your solution in the comments section. Welcome back, and in this part, let's look at what we call HTML entities. The question is, what are HTML entities? HTML entities are special codes used to display reserved characters or symbols. Okay, so in HTML there are some reserved character, and a good example of reserved character is this less than and greater than. Remember, when you write a tag in HTML, right, we use this less than, then we write the tag name, right, then we close it. Okay, so when you write the opening tag, you use less than, you write the tag name, and you also use the greater than. So this particular character is actually a reserved character. Now the point is, if in your HTML you need to actually write this symbol, you want to display this symbol in your web page, how do we do that? So HTML handle this as special characters, and they are called HTML entities. Okay, so the solution HTML provides us is actually special codes. HTML uses special codes for this, and the browser actually understands this special code. All right, so next, let's see some essential entities in HTML. So for the less than, when you actually use this code, okay, so we use this particular code. Okay, so we have this amp, then we have LT for less than, we have the same amp, then we have GT for greater than. Okay, so and we have amp for the ampersand. Okay, then we have the quotes, and the most popular one is actually this copyright. I'm sure you visited many websites and you always see this copyright, then the year, okay, maybe 2025, 2024. Okay, so I'm very sure you've seen this very well in many websites. So let's actually see how this works in action. Here is where we left our code in the last section. Now, let's actually start from this footer, just like what I said a few minutes ago. So in most websites, we always see the copyright symbol, right? So we always see something like this. We put our arm and it's copy. The editor is actually helping us out. So finally, we have to put semicolon here. And most times after the copyright, you see things like 2025, my Twitter clone. Okay, so this here is HTML entity. Now let's actually go back here. Okay, so let's actually go back here, and after this address, let's simply add a paragraph. And inside this paragraph, we want to say something like, I love using div tags in HTML. Okay, remember div tag, we need to write this less than, right? Then we put div and close it this way. Now that is exactly what we want to do. So let's say, okay, we can do this, okay, because it's somehow confusing. So using this special character directly on your page is actually not advisable, and that is why the entity is very important. So for the less than, down, we simply use our amp, and here we use LT, very simple to remember, less than, and save this. Now you see we have the same results. Then we put our div, then finally we add greater than, then we add our semicolon and save it. So now you see I love using the div, then here we say tags in HTML. Okay, great. This is how you use these entities in HTML, and of course we are going to see more of this later. Web pages without media, boring, right? Let's learn how to make your site pop with media the right way. So by the end of this lesson, you will know how to embed media from your computer or from the internet. But the point is, what is media in HTML? So media is basically visual or audio content embedded on a web page. Okay, so any visual or audio content you see on a web page is a good example of media. And we have images, for instance, logos, graphics, photos, and we've seen how we can actually add image on our web page. So the next one is what we call the audio, for instance, music, voice, or podcasts. They are all examples of audio. Then we have video, okay, and we have embeds. For instance, we can actually get a map and embed it into our web page. We can embed tweets, we can embed video players into our web page. So these are what we call media in HTML. Let's actually pick this one after the other and see how it works. Let's see that in action. This is where we left the code in the last session. After this particular session, let's actually add another section, and inside this section we want to add an audio. And to add audio in HTML, it's very simple, right? We simply use the audio tag. Okay, so HTML gives us what we call audio tag. The audio tag expects a very important attribute, and that is what we call the source attribute. Okay, we need to pass the path to that audio. Okay, so remember for image, so remember what we did when we added an image into our web page. Okay, so let's look for that. So remember, look at what we have here. When we added an image, the image tag actually accepts the src, and maybe for now let's say audio.mp3. Okay, remember the image file has its own file extension, right? HTML has a file extension, PDF has .pdf, audio also have .mp3, right? So let's save this file. Okay, so this source is very important, and remember it points to the audio file. Okay, so next let's add this particular attribute called controls, and this actually will show the play or pause UI. So this controls is actually what shows the play or pause user interface. Okay, so now if you scroll down, great, so here we have something, right? Now this actually is not playing. You know why? Because here we specified audio.mp3. Now let's toggle this place, open this place. Remember when we worked with an image, we add the name of our image, we add that particular file. This is the image file. It is sitting here inside our folder, right? We have it in this our local machine. But for this case now, here we have audio.mp3. Look at this place. Do we have anything like audio.mp3? No, that is the only reason why this is not working. What we want to do now is visit a website where we can download free audio, right? We want to download the free music. So let's go to pixabay.com. okay, so here we can search for any free music. Let's see this one, Don't Talk. Click on download, and let's just go straight to our folder. So search for the folder, right? Remember the folder we created at the beginning of the course. So mine is this HTML CSS course, and here I have images. I'm going to click on new folder, and I'm going to add audios, and I'm going to say create, and inside this audio folder I'm going to rename this to Don't Talk. Okay, and let's save this. Great. Now let's go back to our page and let's close this logo. Okay, so let's reduce the size here. Right now we now have this new folder. okay, and inside this folder we have this file here, okay, don't talk, and you actually see this is an audio file, okay, .mp3. so now what I'm going to do is to remove this, and I want to point to this particular file, okay, so I'm going to do /, and it is inside the audios folder, and I'm going to put don't talk. Now let's save this, and immediately we save this, okay, immediately we save this. Look at this, right? And yeah, I can play this. Oh, I'm dancing right now. Oh, great. So I hope you are enjoying this course. So you can actually download this. We see all this just because we added these controls. You can actually remove these controls and see what happens. So because of these controls, we can see all this. Great. I hope you see how this works. Now I have a question. What if the file is missing, or I misspelled this path? Okay, so if I misspelled this is not going to work again, right? Now, what if I don't even misspelled this, everything is correct, but the browser the user is using, for instance, remember, if we publish this website, if we push this out, a user might actually use Safari or use, let's say, Google Chrome. Some might even use Mozilla to open this. What if Mozilla doesn't support MP3? Okay, what if it does not support .mp3 file extension? What will happen to this? You know, this will automatically break down, and that actually is a very bad user experience. Okay, and that leads us to another way in which we can actually add audio to our HTML file. Okay, so we still use the audio tag. Okay, now inside the audio tag, instead of passing this src here, instead of passing src as an attribute inside the audio tag, we use another tag inside the audio tag, and this particular tag is called source. Okay, so we also have source tag, is a self-closing tag. Okay, so is a void element. So inside this source, we can now pass our src and specify the path of this image. So we can specify the path here, okay, and we can now specify the type. What is the type for this? It is audio/mpeg. Now, why are we using this? Remember, we said, for instance, if the browser does not support mp3, so with this you can now add another source, so you can add as much as you can, right? So here we can add another source. Okay, so here now we can specify this. For instance, we can download the same audio in different formats. So let's say we have this same audio in .ogg. Okay, so here we can simply specify the type, and here we say audio/ogg and save this file. Okay, so inside the audio tag itself, here we simply put our controls. Now, the beauty of what we just did is, if the browser does not support .mp3, the browser can actually support .ogg. Okay, so here you can add many other sources. So if you have .mp3, .ogg, whatsoever, you add that here, so that if any browser does not support any type, it falls back. Okay, so it falls back to the next one. If it does not support this, it falls back to the next one, and your audio is going to be suitable in all browsers. Okay, so this is very important. This makes it possible for us to add multiple file formats. Okay, and this is what we call better error handling in programming. After all this, for instance, if my browser does not support mp3, if my browser does not support mpeg, and it does not support OGG, then let there be a fallback test. And the fallback test is your browser does not support the audio element. Okay, and let's save this. When we save this, this is the second audio. One thing we can do, let's actually comment out the first one. So now this audio is exactly what we have here on the page, and of course this still works, right? It still works because my own browser supports .mp3. If you open this our web page in any other browser that does not support mp3, there is going to be a fallback, so it's going to fall back to .ogg, and if it doesn't support .ogg, then it's going to display this particular text. This text here is what we call callback text. Okay, so this is a better way of adding audio in your HTML file. Remember, all these other formats must actually be saved here. So here we saved .mp3. You can download other formats and save them here. Then you link that here. Okay, great. In summary, when you write the audio tag and put this control, for instance, without any of this, and you save this, with this alone, you will see all these controls, okay, but it's not working, right? If you remove this control, you are going to see nothing on that page. Okay, so that controls is very important in this case, because that is actually what shows all these controls we see on the page. And after that, we add all our source, right? We add the source. So this is like the first choice. This is the second choice. You can add more. And finally, if the browser doesn't support any of this, it falls back to this particular text. I hope this is clear enough. All right, so next, let's actually look at some other important audio attributes. So we have what we call autoplay. Now, what does autoplay do? This is going to make sure that the audio plays automatically. Okay, so it plays the audio automatically. So let's add audio play, and immediately you save this, you see this actually plays automatically. Let's remove this and save this. Do you see what happened? Now put that back and save it. So that is what autoplay does. We also have what we call muted. And of course, I'm sure you know what that is going to do. The audio is going to be muted by default. And it is very important to know. Pay attention to this. Whenever you use autoplay, it's advisable to always add the muted attribute. Of course, the audio by default is playing, but remember, it is muted. This is very important because most browsers restrict autoplay unless it is muted by default. Okay, so if you remove this, most browsers actually restrict this, but if you add muted, then that is going to work. Okay, now we also have what we call loop. Loop actually replay audio automatically. So when we put loop here, it's going to replay this audio automatically. Okay, so these are the very important audio attributes you should actually know about. Next, let's look at videos in HTML. Just like audio, we use the video tag, and the video tag also take the controls. Okay, so it takes the controls attributes, and when we save this, now we have this video with the control. Okay, but now nothing works because we've not specified the source of this video. Okay, so here we can now use src, and now we can pass the source of the video. So for now, just like what we did for audio, here we downloaded this audio and we saved it here inside our local machine. So let's do the same thing for video. And for video, let's go to pieces.com, and here we can download free videos. So let's click on videos. Okay, so let's scroll down, and I think I like this, so let's click on download, and we can also navigate to our project folder. So here, and I'm going to click on new folder, add another folder, and call that videos. So let's rename this to, let's just use vid1. Okay, so this is a bad naming, but let's use vid1. Now let's go back to our file, and here we now have another folder, which is the videos, and we have this vid1. Okay, so now I can do /, and let's search for the folder, and now we can open vid1. Let's save this file and go back to our page. So now we have this video, and it is actually working. But you see, this actually is very large. Okay, so the video also takes the width attributes. Okay, so let's close these parts. Command B, and here let's pass width, and for now let's say 400. Okay, so this looks better. Just like we did for audio, it is also very important to think about what happens if a particular browser does not support MP4. Okay, so it's very important to always think about your error handling. You need to think out of the box. You need to think about alternatives. Okay, so what happens if this does not work? So we have to also do exactly what we did in the case of audio. So here we use the video tags, okay, and we use also the source. Okay, we use the source element, and remember this is a self-closing element, and inside the source we can now pass our src. So let's use the same path. So here we say videos and this. Okay, so we passed this, the source, and we need to pass the type. So for this it is video and it is /mp4. Next we can add another source here. Okay, and remember here you can add many other sources depending on the formats you have, but it is the same approach. Okay, so here let's add our fallback test. So your browser does not support the video tag, so let's comment out this and let's save this. So now we have this. Let's actually pass the width. Here we add the controls, and here let's use width same 400, and you see we have the same results. Okay, so let's also consider some important video attributes. Just like we have seen the controls, we've seen width, we also have what we call autoplay, okay, which is just the same thing. It's going to do the same thing the audio autoplay does. You see, this plays automatically. We also have the loop. Okay, so that's, and remember when we use autoplay, it is very important to also pass muted. Okay, so this is going to be muted by default. We also have loop, and of course when this video finish playing, it's going to start all over again by default. So let's see this in action. Just watch. Okay, so that's finished and it started all over again. And there is another very good attribute which is called the poster. Okay, so what is this used for? This shows a preview image before the video starts. So let's actually remove this autoplay, and for this poster let's go to our images and let's use this logo and save this. Okay, so before the video starts you actually see this our logo, and this is very beautiful. So you can actually put any poster in your video. When you click on start, that is actually gone, and now you can see your video. Okay, so you see how this works. So now you've seen how this attribute works: the controls, autoplay, loop, muted, and poster. This is actually very interesting. I don't know how you feel, but this is actually very nice. Let's see how we can embed some content into our web page, and we do this using what we call iFrame tag. iFrame tag is used to embed web page within a web page. Okay, so we can embed a web page into our own web page. We can embed a particular video from another source. Okay, we can do that using what we call iFrame. What happens if I want a video from YouTube to actually play on my own page? Now let's see what happens if we try to do that using the normal video tag that we know. Let's see if this works or not. Okay, so to do that, let's go to youtube.com. So instead of showing this particular video, I want to show the one from YouTube. I simply have to change this address to exactly the one from YouTube. Now let's save this file and see what happens. If you click on this, this does not work. Okay, now this is because this here is actually something from another place, and you're trying to embed it into your own web page, right? So for you to use this video, you must have the video rightly saved in your own local machine. Okay, so the videos, you are trying to use another video from a different page, so this will not work this way. So let's change it to what we had before. So to do that, we need to use what we call iFrame. And the iFrame also takes the source attribute. So here we need to get a video from YouTube and put the link here. Okay, so you can actually visit youtube.com. Okay, visit youtube.com and click on a video. You can get the link, okay, but it has to be this /embed. Get the link and put it here here in the SRC and save this file. So when we save this file, we now have this, okay, and we can actually play this video. Okay, so this here is a video coming directly from YouTube, and you can see if you click on this, you can easily watch on YouTube. So now we are in youtube.com. Great. Now look at this video. Let's copy the link and do the same thing we did. Let's see if it will actually work. Let's save this. You see, this does not work. Okay, and that is because this video is not seated in our PC. This video is coming from another web page. So with iFrame, we can embed content from another web page into our own web page. The iFrame also takes many more attributes. For instance, we can specify the width, and we can change the width to 560. Okay, so we now have something like this. This is large. We can specify also the height, and let's say this should be 315. Okay, so now we have this, the width, and we have the height also. Let's actually check many other attributes. We also have the title. So here, let's say YouTube video. Okay, so we have another very important attribute, and that is what we call allow full screen. This attribute is actually what lets users expand the video to full screen. Allow full screen, and save this file. Okay, so let's check our video now. Okay, so now we have this, and we can now click on this to actually expand this. Let's go back to our code. Okay, so in our code, let's actually remove that allow full screen. Let's remove this and save the file. Go back to the video. You see, this actually is disabled. You can't use this. Okay, so when you click on this, you actually get full screen is unavailable. So you have to set it in your code. You have to allow that from your code. When you allow that, you now see that that actually is available. We also use iFrame for another thing that is very important. For instance, if I want to embed a map, so here I will say iFrame, okay, and I will close this. And now I need to pass SRC for source. I want to embed a map from Google Map. Okay, so I will use HTTPS, and that should go to www.google.com, okay, /maps and /embed. So here I will say pb equals ... and save this file. Okay, so now let's go to our web page and scroll down. So here you see this map. Let's go back and actually change the size. So let's increase the width. So let's set this to 600 and set the height to, let's say, 450. Okay, let's also allow full screen, and let's save this now. Then let's go back to our page. This is still loading. Okay, so here you see we have this. Okay, and this is actually beautiful, but there is something here. Look at this border. We can actually remove that, so we can add another attribute, and that attribute is called style. For now, we are not going to stress ourselves on this because we've not gotten to CSS, but with this we actually removed that border, and this map actually looks more beautiful. Okay, and there are many more attributes. For instance, we can add the loading attribute and set this to lazy. Okay, and for now, the only thing I'm going to tell you about this particular attribute is that it's very important for performance. So we always use loading to be equal to lazy, and in programming we call that lazy loading, and this is used for performance. So what it does is to delay loading our map until a user scrolls near that map. That is lazy loading in a simple way. For now, I think that is enough. Okay, so now you can actually add an image into your website. You can add audio, add video, and you can add iFrame. I hope this makes sense to you. Please, you can actually pause, play with what we've done, and join me when you feel like it. Welcome back. Let's look at tables in HTML. Tables help you present structured data. Okay, for instance, prices, timetables, rankings, etc. in a clean, readable way. But the point is, we need to know how to use the right tags to organize our rows and columns. Okay, HTML provides us with what we call the table tag. To create a table in HTML, we basically start with this table tag. Then we have what we call a TR, which stands for table row, and this is simply used to create a single row. Okay, so we use TR to create a row. Then we have what we call TH, and this stands for table heading cell. Then we have what we call the TD, which holds the table data. Here is a basic table structure in HTML. So it starts with this table tag. Okay, so we have the opening table tag, and inside the table, remember, a table is simply made of rows and columns. So we have TR to create a row. Then we have THead, which is the heading like title for each column. Okay, so for this row, we have title 1, subject, title 2, time. Then we have another row, and in that row, we have the table data. The table data for the first one, table data for the second one. Then the next row, table data for the first one, table data for the next one. Let's see how this works in action. Okay, so this is where we left our code in the last session, and for this particular part of the course, let's actually create another file. Okay, so here let's create another file, and let's call this table.html. Okay, so now instead of loading index.html, let's change this to table.html. So now it is empty because of course there is nothing on this page. So first, let's add our doc type. Okay, so we add the doc type, and remember the next tag is what? The HTML tag. That is the next tag, and this HTML tag takes an attribute, which is the lang attribute. Here let's simply specify English. Okay, so inside the HTML we basically have two things. The first one is the head, right, and the second one is the body. So inside this head, so for now let's simply add the title, right, and let's call this table. Okay, so if you save this now and go back to our page, okay, so if we save this now and go back to our page, of course this is still going to be empty, right? But look at this place. Now you see this table, which is the title. Okay, good. Let's leave this head like this for now and just continue with what we are doing. Okay, so inside the body we want to create a table. Let's add h1, and here let's just say timetable. So here we see our timetable. Very good. Now we want to add a table in HTML. So to add a table in HTML, you simply start with the table tag. As simple as that. Okay, we start with the table tag. When you save this, you see nothing yet, but when you inspect this page, okay, so go to your elements, you see I have the tag already. We have this table here. Okay, but for now it is still empty. Now to actually create this table, after the table tag, we now have to add the rows and the column. Okay, so we add the row using the table tr, table row. Okay, now inside this first table row, we want to add two things. So we want to add the table head for the title 1. So here let's say subject. Okay, and let's add another t head, and for this we are going to say time. Let's save this. Okay, so here you see subject and time, and the text is bold. You know why? Because we use t head. This is row 1. Okay, so let's add another row, and we do that using tr, right? And inside that second row, this is going to be the row 2. We want to add a table data. So this table data, the first one is going to be under this first one, and the second table data we are going to add is going to be under the second one. So here let's simply say math. Okay, so mathematics, and the time, let's say 8 a.m. So let this be the first subject in the morning. You see what just happened? So here you have math, and here you have 8 a.m. This is row 2. Now let's add another row, and you see this is going to be the third row. Okay, look at this test. Look at this test. Let me push this side by side. Okay, let's push this side by side. And let's close this part, Command B or Control B. Let's toggle this. Okay, now look at this. This is very, very interesting. Table in HTML is very simple. You just have to understand the very basics. Okay, now look at this. For table data, it's actually not bold. Look at this. Here is what? TH, table head, and that is why it is bold. This one is not bold. If you change this TD to TH, for instance, and save this file, it's going to be bold. Do you see that here? This is bold. So this actually is not th. This is just the data under subject. The subject is the th. So we have to use the right tag. So for that, it is td. Now let's add the third row, and this here, let's add the td. Remember, the third row, that's for the next subject. So here, let's say English, and the second td, we want to add the time for English, and let's say this should be around 10 a.m. And you see, so we can keep building this table, keep building this timetable, but now we used another t row, and here should be td. Okay, so here let's say computer science, and the time for this should be, let's say, 2 p.m. Okay, so computer, let's reduce this to CSC. Let's use the short form. And the time, let's add the time. The time should be 2 p.m. Good. So this is a table in HTML. So this is how we create a table in HTML. The table tag starts the table. So it starts a table. TR is the table row. Okay, so this is row 1, row 2, row 3, and row 4. To add another column here, for instance, you need to add that from the first row. Okay, from here we add another t edge. And for instance, let's say location, and let's save this. You see, we now have another column. So here now we can fill this. So location. So let's say this is in all A, and let's do the same thing here, TD, and this one is also in all A, okay? And let's add this TD, and this one is going to be in all D, okay? Okay, so that is how we create a table in HTML. Now, there is also something called semantic grouping, okay? Semantic grouping. We can make our table more easy to understand by using the semantic tag. Okay, so after this table row, we can actually wrap these parts with what we call table head, and that we easily tell that this is the head part of our table, just like what we did when we were structuring our file. Remember, when we structured our file in HTML, we said we have the heading, then we have the main, and we have the footer. The table also has head, it has body, and it has foot. Okay, so let's do that here. For this, we are going to wrap this particular row containing the table head inside a particular tag, and this tag is called t-head. Okay, so let's grab this part and put it after this tr, and let's save this. Okay, remember, visually you see nothing, but this is very important. This does a whole lot of things. Okay, and next let's add what we call t-body. Okay, and let's remove this and put that after this last one. Then finally, let's add what we call t-foot. Okay, t-foot. We also have what we call the t-foot, which is the table foot element, and it's written exactly as pronounced. Okay, t-foot. So inside this t-foot, let's actually add a table row, and inside this table row, let's add the table data. And now we want to actually add something like a summary of what we have in our table. So let's say total, we have 3 courses. Okay, and let's save this, and let's save this. Okay, so now we have this last row, and this particular row is inside the t-foot. Now let's inspect this page. Actually, if you go to your elements now and expand this table, you see we have 3 basic things: the t-head, okay, the t-body, you see the t-body, then we have the t-foot. This table will make more sense when we get to CSS actually. Now, let's see another thing that is also very important while working with table in HTML, and that is what we call merging cells. What happens if I want the t-foot, this particular row here, to actually extend across these 3 columns? So currently is in this particular column 1. I want this to expand to column 3. How do I do that? So we have what we call the col span and the row span. Col span and row span. Let's see this in action. So for instance, remember, this is a tag, and a tag can take what we call an attribute. So for instance, we can use the col span attribute, and here I will simply say 3. Why? Because there are 3 columns. So now this is spanning 3 columns, column 1, 2, and 3. And to see this, let's add more things here and save this. Do you see? It spans the 3 columns correctly. Okay. And if I want this to span just 2 columns, okay, so I can change this to 2 and save this. So now it takes just first and second column. To actually see this, let's add more text and save this. Okay, so do you see what happened here? For now, let's just leave it at 3. Now, we also have what we call the row span. So for instance, for this math, let's actually add row span. And let's say we want this to actually span through 2 rows. Okay, so now you see what happened. This math now occupies the first and the second row. If you change this to 3, look at what happened. You see, math now takes both first, second, and third row. Okay, so this is how we can use row span in HTML. Let's add 2 here. You see 8 a.m. now takes 2 rows. So it's now sitting on row 1 and row 2. Okay, so this is how row span works. And this will make more sense when we actually start CSS. Okay, and congratulations. You can actually build any table now in HTML. So by the time we get to CSS, we'll see how we can actually build a particular company data table for them. Okay, great. And yes, it is your time to shine. It's time for meaning challenge. So what you're going to do is to create a file and you're going to call this schedule.html. So you're going to build a table that shows days from Monday to Friday. Then add 3 subjects per day. Okay, so each day is going to have 3 subjects. You are going to use table head, table body, and table foot. Then merge 1 row for lunch using span. Okay, so you're going to merge 1 row for lunch because for each day, of course, there should be time for lunch. Then add a summary in the footer. Total periods per week is equal to 15. All right, please do this and drop your solution in the comment section for me. Thank you. Next, let's look at a very important topic in HTML, and this is called forms. Okay, a form is how users interact with your websites. It's how they sign up, post a tweet. Okay, so when we go to Twitter, we actually post a tweet, search, or contact you. When you log into your Facebook, for you to log into your Facebook page, you need to sign up or actually log in. So you enter your username and you enter your password. Okay, that is actually form. If you are building anything dynamic, mastering forms is non-negotiable. So let's see how forms work in HTML. And for this part, I am also going to create another file and I'm going to call this forms.html. Okay. And I believe by now you are used to this HTML boilerplates. Okay. So here, let's pass the lang attributes and let's just say English. We can also say English and specify US. Okay. Now, after this, let's add the 2 core things, which is the head and the body. Okay, so inside the head, for now, let's simply add our title. Okay, and for this, let's say forms and let's save this. So we need to change this from table to forms, right? Is that the name of the file? Let's see. Great. So now we see our title, forms, and that is coming from this part because now if you do this and save that, you actually see that here. Great. So the point is, how do we actually build our forms in HTML? So first, let's just add our H1 and here let's simply say forms. Okay, to actually build forms in HTML, we simply use the form tag. Okay, you see HTML is actually very friendly. So we have what we call the form tag. And for now, inside this form tag, we are going to be adding what we call an input field. Okay, so when you go to facebook.com, for instance, now look at this page. So this is facebook.com and this is the login page, right? This here is simply what we call form. Okay, so this is exactly what we are trying to build. Now, this particular field here, this here where you can actually enter text, you can enter your username or your email address. It is called an input field. This also is an input field, and this one is a button. So we are going to see how this works. Okay, so we are going to see how this works. Let's go step by step. Okay, so let's go back to our own page. So the first thing we need to enter is that thing we called an input field. And an input field is simply a self-closing elements, and just as the name implies, input field. So HTML gives us this input tag. Okay, so here we can now specify what type. So we can specify the type of the input field using this type attributes. So here we have several types. Look at the list. So we have type of button, checkbox, color, date time, email, file, image, month. So interesting. But now we are looking for the type text. When you save this, you simply see this. And here now I can enter my name. Okay, I can enter my name. I can enter anything here. So this is just look at this and look at this. Okay, they are almost the same thing, right? Okay, let's continue. This here is an input field, and this is what we call a text input field. Okay, now let's add another input field. So let's say input. Okay, remember this is self-closing, and we can now specify another type. So here we can say the type should be password. So we have another type called password. And for this, when you type here, you see this is going to be password. This input field also takes another attribute, very important one, and this is called a placeholder attribute. So here we can simply give the user an int. Okay, because if a user visits our website, the user will be confused. Should I enter my name, or what exactly do you expect me to do? Here you see Facebook actually tells the user email address or phone number. So those are the two things. Either you enter your email or you enter your phone number. So here we can simply say, email or phone number. So here let's say enter your name, okay, and save this. Let's close this part. Command B. So if you save this now, do you see here you now see enter your name. Let's correct the spelling. Enter your name. And for this now, we can add the placeholder attribute. And here we can simply say enter your password. Okay. So a user will simply know that, oh, this should be my password. Now, instead of using this placeholder, we can also use another HTML tag. And that tag is what we call label. Okay, so there is this label tag. The label element is not a self-closing element. So here I can enter the label for this particular input. And remember, the label for this input is actually name, right? So here we say name and save this file. So now we have name and we have this field, but there is no link between this text here and this field here. Okay, we have two fields here. There is no any link between this text. So we need to pass what we call for. Okay, so here we say for and we enter name. In this input field, we can now pass an attribute, which is the ID. So we can use the ID attribute and pass the same thing we have here. So here I'm going to say name. When you save this file now, click on this name again. You see, it's going to highlight that field. So this name is actually tied to this input field. Okay, so let's do the same thing for our password. So we simply say label, okay, and here let's say password, and now we can say for password. And for this to work, because when you click on this now, there is no link, okay, this is not linked to any input field. So for the password field, we now have to add an ID, and this is going to be the same thing we have here. So we call this password, and let's save this. So when you click on this, it is now bind to this particular input field. Great. Next, let's look at another input field. And for this input field, first, let's add a paragraph here and let's say gender. So for instance, if you go back to Facebook, click on this create new account. So here now you see different type of input field. Okay, so this is another type of input field. And we've already seen that of test. So this is a test input field. And you are seeing this red line because this field is required. Okay, for the next one, let's add our input elements. Okay, and for the type now, we need to specify radio. So here we say radio, and let's save this. So now we have this radio button, just as we saw here in Facebook, right? Great. Here, let's add a label. And remember, for the label, you need to use for. And here, let's say male. That means here we need to pass an ID of male. So we have this. And let's add another one for the second gender. So we use input. And the type is going to be radio. Okay. And ID now should be what? Female. And next, let's add the label. And label for female. Okay. And here we say female. And let's save this. Okay, so now we have two radio buttons, but look at what happens. We can select both of them. But when you go back to Facebook, it's either you select female, male, or custom. You can't actually select two at a time. But in our case, we can select the two. So there is other attributes that we need to pass, and it's a very important one. So the first one is what we call name. Okay, so we can pass name here, the name attribute, and here we are going to say gender. Okay, and we can pass the value. The value for this particular input field, for this, the value is male. Okay, and for the second one, let's pass name, and both of them have the same name because it is gender, right? And the value of this is going to be female. Okay, let's save this file now. And now we can only select one. Do you see? We can only select one because the same name groups the radios, so only one can be selected. Okay, so using the same name here groups these radio buttons in such a way that only one can be selected. So this is how we can add radio button in HTML. So the next input field we are going to be considering is what we call checkbox. So let's simply add our input, and here we want to specify the type. Okay, and let the type here be checkbox. Now, before this, let's actually add a paragraph. And for this paragraph, let's write interest. Okay, and let's save this file. Okay, and let's save this file. So we have this interest, and here you see this checkbox because I already added an input and I specified the type as checkbox. Okay, so here let's actually add a label for this label, and this I'm going to say coding, and this should be labeled for coding. And that means here I have to add an ID, and the ID here should be coding. Okay, so let's add another one. Input, okay, and of course the type is checkbox, and here let's add a label, and the label for this should be design, and of course the four attributes, and here we say design, and that means I need to add an ID here, and this should be design. And let's save this. Okay, so now we have this checkbox. Okay, and of course, just like before, we can actually check both. But remember, this is a checkbox. Okay, for checkboxes, you can actually check more than one option. You can be able to code and at the same time be a designer, right? For checkbox, we can check more than one. So even if we pass the name here and specify this name as coding, and also pass the value as coding, okay, so the name here should actually be interest. And here also name should be interest, and the value should be design. And let's save this. So with this, we can still be able to check too, because for checkbox, you can select multiple checkboxes. Okay, now let's add another input field. And for this, we want the type to be file. Okay, so immediately you set the type of an input field to be file. When you click on that, this will actually enable you to select and upload a file. Okay, but there are more to this. Okay, but first here, let's add a label. And let's say upload your resume. And of course, this label should be for, let's say, CV. And here, let's simply add a line break, okay, just to push that down. And now we have to add an ID and call this CV. And let's add a name. Let this name be resume. Okay, so when you click on this now, we should be able to select a file. Okay, so now we can actually select a file to upload. Okay, the next type of form field we want to look at is what we call the text area. So in HTML, we have this particular text area. Okay, the text area is actually not a self-closing element. Okay, but when we save this now, we actually see this text area. Okay, so let's add a BR here to push that down. Okay, remember, later you don't need this BR. Whenever you know CSS, you don't need this BR because you can use CSS to add any space anywhere you want. Okay, but once you add this text area, it gives you this box, okay, where you can actually input any text at all. Okay, and you can even resize this. Okay, so you can resize this just the way you want. But this text area also takes in some attributes. So we can specify the number of rows. For instance, if you want the rows to be 5, and let's say we want the columns to be, let's say, 20. So with this, we specify the size we want for this text area. The text area also accepts the placeholder attribute. So here we can say, tell us about yourself. And let's save this. So here you see, tell us about yourself. So this is how we can use text area for multi-line input. Now, let's also look at what we call the select tag. So for the select tag, we simply use select. And inside this select tag, we can now add several options. So you want the user to be able to select from a list of items. So we use the option tag, and here we can say HTML. Then let's add another option tag. So here we can add as much option as we want. So here we say option, and the next one, let's say CSS. Let's add another option. And here, let's say JavaScript. Okay, and let's save this. Now, let's add a label here. Okay, so we say label, and here we simply say choose your course, and let's save this file. Okay, and for this label, we need to use for, and here we say course. Pay attention to how the browser actually ignores white spaces in HTML. Okay, so this space, even if I do this and save this file, the browser is going to ignore that space. So white spaces are actually being ignored in HTML. Just pay attention to that. Now, when you actually click on this, you see those 3 options I added. So I have CSS, I have JavaScript, and I have my HTML. Okay, for this particular option, we can add what we call the value attribute. And the value here should be HTML. Here, the value should be CSS. And here, the value should be JavaScript. Okay, if you click on this text, there is no link with this particular input field. Remember, that is because we didn't pass the ID. So here we need to specify course as the ID. And by doing that, you see what happened. Okay, great. So in this select field, we can now say that the name is equal to what? The name is equal to course. Okay, so this is how we can actually build select field in HTML. Let me show you more of this input field before we end this session. So let's still use that input, okay? And here, let's see the type. For instance, if we pick color and save this, let's go back. Do you see here you now have this color picker, and you can select any color of your choice, okay? So let's remove this, and instead of color, let's actually pick dates. Let's save this. And now if you pick dates and click this, you see this option to actually select dates. So this is how you can add dates in your web page. So there is another very important element we normally add here, and that is what we call the button element. But before that button element, this input field, okay, the input field also have another type. And that type is what we call the submit type. Okay, this is the submit type. When you do this, you will see this submit by default. Look at this here. Did I add a text? I did not add any placeholder, but because I used the type submit, you actually see something like a button. Look at when I click this, nothing happens to this particular arrow here, to this thing here. Look at this reload icon here. When I click on any of this, nothing happens to that icon. But look at what happens when I click this submit. You see, it is refreshing this page, and by default, it is actually trying to submit this particular form. Okay, so when you have an input field and the type is submit inside a form, this is going to submit the form. This form is actually a very important topic, not just in HTML, but in programming as a whole. Okay, in web development as a whole. Seeing this submit, we can actually specify a value. Okay, so here we can use value, and here we can say submit form and save this. So if you go back here, you no longer see just submit, but now you see submit form. Okay, so you can use this to add the text. Now, there is another thing we can use, and that is what we call a button element. So we can use the button element. So here, let's use the button tag, and here we simply say submit. Okay, and let's save this file. Now, once you do this, you see the text we have, and it still has the same behavior. Why? Because this button is inside the form. So here I can also change this to submit form, and now I have submit form. When you click that button, it submits the form because the button is inside the form. Okay, so these are the two ways. You can either add a button using the input type of submit, or you simply use the button tags. Okay, so this is actually how you can build a form. You have just built your first functional HTML form, and you now understand how websites collect user data. Now, let me tell you one more thing about this form. This particular form tag itself takes two special attributes. The first one is what we call the action. Okay, so here we want to tell the form where we want this form to be submitted to. For instance, if I want this form, if I say submit this to, let's say, post, okay, and I save this, when I click this form, look at what happens. It tries to go to that post. So do you see /post here? And there is another attribute, and that is what we call the method attribute. Okay, so here we specify the method of this form submission, and this can be get or post most times. Okay, so you will actually understand this better when we get to JavaScript. Congratulations, you've just built your very first functional HTML form, and now you understand how websites collect user data. Okay, from login pages to posts, it all starts with simple HTML form like this one.